I'm Mark Sainer. I'm the FR Technical Manager here at Workbright Uniform Company. I've been in the fire and safety industry for, I guess it's 40 years now. And been with Workbright for 11. And joining me today is Tom Foley, retired Chief of CAL FIRE, and we're going to have him give us some of his knowledge and insights as we move along. So welcome everybody to today's webinar, where we're going to talk about flame-resistant stationwear and why it's something that you might want to take a closer look at if you haven't gone that way already. So with that said, let's get started. So I want to talk about some of the tips for choosing the right stationwear. First, we're going to talk about some of the different fabric options that are out there that are being considered. We'll talk about the safety and protection aspects that they provide or don't provide, as the case may be. We'll talk about understanding some of the risks involved with wearing what you're wearing underneath your turnout gear and what the implications of that might be. We'll talk about some of the differences between FR station uniforms and polyester, and likewise with FR and 100% cotton. And then, some of the design features that might come with the various types of FR stationwear. So let's start off with looking at what some of the fabric options are in today's marketplace. Today, we're primarily looking at 100% cotton is an option that's out there and been out there for many years. 100% polyester. You've also got your poly cotton blend, which is typically a 65-35 polyester cotton blend uniforms that are available today. Also have the Nomex 3A, which is the one of the Workbright classic uniforms that we've had out for many years. They're used by a number of accounts around the country. And then there are also some monocrylic blends, which are a little bit of a newer fabric that's come into the marketplace, and is also a flame-resistant FR blend of fabric that's out there for station uniforms. Been used in the industrial world for quite a number of years, and is now making its way into the fire service station uniforms as well. So those are the kind of the options that are available. There's also some wool and some wool blends, not used as much as they were many, many years ago, but these are the primary ones that you'll find as your options for fabric choices. So some of the things we look at when we talk to fire departments, many of them don't really see the need to have an FR garment uniform underneath their turnouts. They don't really see what the value of that is, and so they typically would buy either a poly cotton or 100% cotton, mostly because it just costs less. But what they don't know really can't hurt them, and that's kind of what we're going to get into today and talk a little bit about the value of the FR and where you might be missing the boat if you don't realize what the risks and what the implications of wearing some of these other uniforms underneath your turnouts. So when we look at some of the real situations that you can see when you're in doing structural firefighting, what's underneath your turnout gear really can matter. And we're going to get into some pretty good detail about that and some testing that's been done. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to the Chief Tom and let him talk a little bit about what some of those risks and the implications are of getting into or wearing FR station wear underneath your turnout gear. So at this point, I'm going to flip slides and I'm going to turn it over to my friend Tom.
Well, thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody. I see we have about 15 people or so on the call. And when I looked at the attendee list, I don't see exactly everybody who's on that, because only Mark has the presenter button, so he knows who's on. But I did see some names that I recognize. So to my friends that are online, welcome. And to those that I don't know, it's a pleasure to have you here. So thanks so much for being here. I spent 27 years in the fire service, and then when I hit that grand old age of 50 as a fire chief, I decided that I was going to live the fire chief's dream and collect my pension and find meaningful employment in the private sector. And I've enjoyed that for the last few years. And in the last year, I've accepted employment from Workbright, and I've enjoyed it because of a few reasons. First of all, for the last several years of my career, I wore work-right uniforms and I wore Nomex. And I was, through the course of my career, I wore polyester, poly blend, and then we got into FR cotton, and then we made our way to Nomex for the last several years of my career. And definitely saw the pros and cons of everything along the way, and was very let's just say that when we finally got to Nomex, I saw the true benefits of wearing a true FR Nomex duty uniform on several levels. When I got to Workrite about a year ago, one of the things I was looking at was the safety message at Workrite, and trying to understand how we can better communicate the safety message when it comes to wearing FR duty uniforms, because as Mark had mentioned, many fire chiefs and firefighters out there think that it really doesn't matter what you wear under your structure gear, because your PPE does the job, and if you get involved in something that where the PPE doesn't do the job, then you got a whole lot more problems to worry about than what you're wearing underneath it. And that can certainly be true depending on the situation, but I really wanted to take a closer look at that. So what I did was I started a project with DuPont, the folks at DuPont, to take a look at how all of the fabrics that Mark covered at the beginning perform in different situations, but we really need to understand the risk first. So you'll see that on this slide we characterize the risk into three areas, and the first one is the routine repeated exposure. The next one is the reasonable maximum exposure, and then the third one is the extreme exposure. So what I want to do is just kind of take a few minutes to talk about what those mean in firefighter language, which you and I all understand. So the routine repeated exposure is what I would just call our normal, basically routine type of fire. I'd call it a room and contents fire. Something we go to pretty much routinely, and in some cases, depending on how busy your department is, it could be a few times a week. It could be more than that or less than that, depending on your department. But it's normal stuff that we go to, and what that looks like is you pull up on that. You may have smoke showing. You may have some fire showing or venting, kind of like in that picture on the top left. And the firefighter does their walk around, takes a look at any kind of hazards, and then progresses to do either an exterior attack or an interior attack, depending on what the situation is. In those types of situations, for the most part, what you're wearing under your turnout gear doesn't really matter. Those are the routine exposures. The firefighter normally has a radiant exposure when they're doing their walk around, and then if they're doing an exterior attack, they continue to have a radiant exposure. They can manage that radiant exposure by stepping away, by doing a bunch of different things, modifying the hose stream, a whole lot of different things. Then once they get a knockdown of the fire, you'll see the firefighters going inside and doing salvage overhaul, pulling ceiling, doing the normal stuff. That's just kind of what we characterize as the routine repeated exposure. It's something that's just the average ordinary fire that a lot of us go to on a routine basis, like I said. So in that case, structural PPE does in fact do its job, and it does in fact take care of all the firefighters' protection needs, and what you wear underneath that doesn't really matter. You could be wearing gym shorts or regular shorts or whatever. I'll just kind of leave it at that. Who knows what they're wearing underneath that, right? So that's the routine repeated exposure. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, I think there's like a place to type in a message or chat. You can certainly ask a question. I think I can see that if you do that. But everybody kind of has that ability, and I'll keep an eye on that as I go over this. So the second level of risk that we're taking a look at, what's been characterized in multiple risk assessments for structural PPE. If you're doing a OSHA compliant risk assessment where you're taking a look at at what level of structural PPE you need, what level of TPP and THL and things like that that you need for your structural gear. You're taking a look at, well, what's the reasonable maximum exposure that I want to protect our firefighters to? And in most cases, for most fire departments, it's going to be flashover conditions. You know, that is doing an interior attack in an enclosed situation, a room and contents fire or more, and you know, you go in, and we all understand. If you're on this call, you're a firefighter, and you definitely understand flashover conditions. We all train to it. We all understand what it is. We all understand how it develops. In that, you know, it's everything starts to when a fire starts to burn, things start to off gas. Everything reaches its ignition temperature, and ultimately, the room and the contents flash, and the conditions, the heat load immediately goes to an extreme level, you know, 1,000 degrees or more, depending on what the size of the room is and the contents and all that. You know, the NIST studies can tell you that it can vary on that. What we do know now is that with the different fuel loads that we have, poly-based fuels, you know, couches, drapery, curtains, furniture, you name it, that flashover condition is happening a whole lot faster now than it ever was before, and that the fire environment now is much more volatile and happens quicker than it ever has before, based upon, you know, the room and the contents, and then the building construction also, you know, how that's managed. Anyway, but let's go back to this. So the reasonable maximum exposure for most departments is flashover, and if you think about it, in most training for most fire departments, you train on recognizing a flashover, how it develops, and then its mitigation, whether you're using any of the multiple ventilation practices that are out there or hose streams to mitigate flashover conditions. But if flashover happens, then we consider that to be, you know, the reasonable maximum exposure. That's what we're building our PPE to withstand. We want it to protect us for a certain amount of time if that flashover occurs, so that we can either mitigate, and hopefully we've already done that, or escape that situation. So in that situation, you know, what you wear underneath your turnout gear, if you're in a flashover, caught in a flashover, can and will impact firefighter survivability. And if the firefighter sustains burns, what they're wearing underneath that will definitely, or can definitely, contribute to the firefighter burn injury. And that's where it starts to become very, very important as to if the firefighter is wearing FR fabrics, because although FR fabrics won't necessarily stop that energy from coming through and burning the firefighter, what the FR fabrics won't do is contribute to the firefighter burn injury, where polyesters or polycottons can in fact contribute to the firefighter burn injury. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So we got a question popped up. Can I ask a question afterwards? Whoever said asking that, absolutely, you can ask it now or later on. That's fine. So let's go to the next level of exposure, or the next risk that we're talking about, and that's extreme exposure, and that could be something that we definitely want our PPE to help protect us to, but our PPE, our structural PPE, isn't necessarily built to protect us to an extreme exposure. Okay, we can't build it to that, and it's never been designed to that. This was an example of a fire in Brooklyn, I believe, or the Bronx, one of the boroughs in New York, where a firefighter was trapped, and he was actually in that fire and made its way out to the ladder. His PPE was actually on fire, but there are several instances of that where firefighters either fall through roofs or fall through floors, are entrapped, and end up where their PPE is basically incinerated, because they're in a situation where the fire has exceeded vastly exceeded what the PPE was ever designed to protect them to. So that's an extreme exposure, and in that condition, definitely what you're wearing underneath can have an impact to your survivability. But let me just say that no PPE is built to the extreme to withstand extreme exposure, because if it were, your PPE would not be very functional for you to use on the normal day-to-day way that you use it, whether it's fighting fire, traffic collisions, dumpster fires, whatever you're using your structural PPE for. It wouldn't be functional for you, because you'd look like the FR Michelin Man if you built your structural PPE to withstand the extreme exposure. Like I said, you still want it to provide you some level of protection, but in this situation, what you wear underneath your PPE definitely can impact both survivability and the amount of burn injury that a firefighter would sustain. We all talk about, and there's no slide on this presentation because we try to make it as quick as possible here for you. Webinars should last 30 minutes or so, but debriding is a big issue. If a firefighter is burned and they're wearing a polyester or a polycotton blend, that polyester will end up into the burn injury. It contributes to the firefighter burn injury. FR fabric will not contribute to the firefighter burn injury. So anyway, that's kind of it from a understanding the risks. So with those three risks in mind, with those three exposures, if you will, in mind, let's take a look at the NFPA standard for 1971, the structural firefighting and proximity firefighting ensemble. So understanding the capabilities of your structural PPE, basically you need to know a couple things: that the TPP, or the thermal protective performance of your gear, basically is a test that replicates flashover conditions. It includes radiant heat, convected heat, and direct flame impingement on that fabric composite, and it estimates the time to second-degree burn. When I was chairing the CAL FIRE statewide PPE working group, I had to basically get a crash course in understanding, what that all means. It's a 2 calorie per centimeter squared test, but all that was really difficult for me to understand until it was broken down for me. And basically this: you take that number, that TPP number, you divide it by 2, whatever it is, and that's the number of seconds that you have until a firefighter will sustain a second-degree burn if that composite is in serviceable condition and there's not issues like stored energy, that a firefighter already has it heated from radiant heat or being out in the sun or whatever. There's several things that can impact that. So the NFPA minimum, you'll see on that slide, is 35. That means that you would have 17.5 seconds to a second-degree burn. And then then that number goes up depending on what turnout gear composite you're buying. All fabrics, the 3 fabrics, outer shell, the thermal liner, and the moisture barrier, there are multiple different combinations on the market. All can provide you different TPPs. The TPP ranges from the 35 as a minimum. It's common to see 40s, 40, 42, 43, 44, 45, all the way up into the 50s, depending on what that department actually specs. And to determine what that is, you should go through the process of a risk assessment to determine that. The reverse, of the opposite side of that, is THL, and that's total heat loss. That's the ability to for the garment to dissipate the physiological heat buildup, and they have an inverse relationship, just to mention that. So the risk assessment helps you balance that TPP and THL for your department. So anyway, we took a look at we wanted to take a look at this. If you take a look at the TPP test, now the TPP test per the 1970 one standard replicates flashover condition by the energy transfer methods, which is direct flame impingement, radiant, and convected heat, and that's what the test actually does. So what we did was we took some polyesters to start with, and that's what this is. We took a 35 TPP, And we did a 17.5 second test, and that's what the NFPA minimum is as far as the seconds of testing that's done for that composite. And we put polyester under there, and this particular polyester is an Under Armour polyester. So we wanted to know what would happen if a firefighter was exposed to a flashover condition wearing that. So if you take a look at the first one, and what we did was there's a thermal calorimeter that sits on top of the composite and measures the time to second-degree burn. That wasn't important for our test simply because we already knew the TPP rating. So what we were trying to do was add a layer of station wear fabric of what firefighters might be wearing, and just wanted to take a look at if it would melt, if it would contribute to the firefighter burn injury, if what they were wearing would cause or help or contribute to that firefighter burn injury. So at a 35 TPP, 17.5 seconds, the NFPA minimum, you'll see, and open means that there was absolutely nothing. There was just fabric sitting on top of each other, that composite with that polyester on there, and you'll see that the actual polyester started to melt right in the middle. Okay, so right where those brown in that dark spot is in the middle, that's where the polyester would actually start to melt to your skin. Okay, that's when that process would begin. Right? So then on the next slide, we compressed it. So we actually took that, it's a piece of copper that sits on that, the calorimeter, and said, so for those areas that the garment would be compressed against your skin, like in the shoulders and the elbows where the SCBA straps are compressed against your skin, what would happen there where those fabrics were compressed and a flashover condition occurred? And you'll see there that when you compress the fabrics together, and ran that TPP test, that there was much more polyester melting, so that you can see that polyester would melt into your skin. So the next, that was at 17.5 seconds. So that's a flashover occurs, and basically a firefighter is escaping that and has 17 seconds to escape that condition. So we wanted to take a look then at up to 29 seconds. So if that occurred, you were in a 35 TPP. What would happen up to like 30 seconds? And so we started looking at, we actually did 17 and a half, and we went to 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, all the way up to 29. And you'll see at 29, the polyester actually melts and just would actually melt into the firefighter's skin. So you can see that. So you can absolutely see between that 17-second minimum test and then all the way up towards 30, that depending on how long that flashover condition were to last, how deep the firefighters are, and how long it would take them to escape that condition, and how intense the flashover is, and basically that would be the heat flux, and the test is 2 calories per centimeter squared. Some flashovers are more intense than that. Some flashovers are not as intense as that. But this at least gives you ability to take a look and compare. Yeah, Mark.
Just wanted to add that you can also note that is in the open condition. There's no compression there, and you can see
right.
how much melt you got without any compression. In the previous slide, you saw how compression increased the severity of it. So that just wanted to note that.
Yep. So that's at a 35 TPP, and not a lot of fire departments are buying the NFPA minimum. So we also wanted to take a look here at what would happen with Nomex. So if you wore a Nomex, for same weight of Nomex, so this is a knit Nomex material, and at 17.5 seconds, what would happen there? Now you'll see that on the second slide, the compressed slide, there's actually that discoloration there. The difference between polyester and Nomex is that Nomex is dyed, so that is called dye sublimation, where the dye starts to basically cook out of the Nomex. So that is not contributing to the firefighter burn injury. There's no polyester or no Nomex fabric that would be melting into the firefighter's skin. That's just dye that's cooking out of that. Okay, so don't confuse that with, oh my God, there's that would also cause a problem, that's what's called dye sublimation. Okay, Mark shows it here on the slide as discoloration, but it's just the dye in that Nomex coming out. It's not melting of the polyester, and you'll see that on a more widespread kind of a over there for 29 seconds. So at 29 seconds, where you saw the polyester just absolutely melt into the firefighter skin and come apart, that at the same weight, you'll see that Nomex will maintain. It will not come apart. It will not degrade and burn into the firefighter skin. It will not contribute to a firefighter burn injury. Okay, and that's the same weight of fabric. So Mark, let's go on to the next one. And by the way, Mark, we did that at 40 TPP. We did that at 45 TPP, and the results were consistent across the board. I have an in-depth presentation I'd be glad to share with people as far as what that looks like. So if you want to know, based on, we have polyesters, we have polycottons, we have different weights of all that. It's a large project I did with DuPont. Obviously, it would take an hour just to do that part of this presentation, and we don't have the time to do that. But I'm always available to answer questions or make time to come out and visit with you if we need to do a training or do something over the phone or whatever it takes. So, Mark, I think this is back to you. And if there's any questions, type them on in, and we'll answer them for you later.
Great. That's great information, Tom. And having the actual test data available, we intuitively knew that there were some issues with having the meltable fabrics underneath, but having the actual test data to support that is fantastic, and that's great. And as Tom said, he's got a lot more than I could put in a webinar today that he can share at later times if people are interested. So one of the points I wanted to make was, not only is it not safe, it's dangerous, contribute to burn injury, but it also doesn't meet the standard. It doesn't meet 1975. If you're wearing anything that's melting fabric, it doesn't meet it, and it spells it out here in 1975 under the purpose, where it talks about it should not contribute to the severity of the burn injury, which Tom mentioned. And it goes on to talk about you want fabrics that are thermally stable, they won't melt, in particular shrink and some other things, but the melting is where the polyesters really and polycottons really start to cause a negative impact on, or potentially could cause negative impact. So just wanted to point that out, that they don't in fact meet NFPA 1975, which because it's a standard for fire departments, we'd like to think that would be meaningful to folks. So stay away from the polys and polycottons. So when you compare FR to poly and polycottons, you've got things, not only the fact that it won't melt, but the appearance of the FR fabrics is much superior to most of the things you find out there, and it will last longer. It's just made of stronger fibers that are going to last longer, particularly the polycottons. And one of the things we hear departments talk a lot about is the fact that they want to have a good public perception, they want to have a good image, and that can have impact on the firefighter morale, that they look good, that they feel like they are professionals, those types of things. So those are some of the other added, outside of the safety benefits that FR can bring to FR Stationwear can bring to your department. So we've talked a lot about the polys, but what about the 100% cottons? What are you looking at there? Well, number one, cotton can't ignite if it's exposed. So if you're at one of those scenes, you're at an accident scene, and maybe, and I'm sure we've all seen it, where the turnout coats are not fully closed up. They have some exposure potentially, or maybe you just have the turnout pants and not the jacket. You do have that cotton or polycotton exposed out there, and it can ignite. And things happen when you're out at those scenes. Things, unforeseen things that you don't want to happen can happen, and that's a situation that you want to try and avoid. One of the other things that we're doing some more research on has to do with heat stress and rehab recovery times, and the FR we feel is going to help in that regard as well. You're looking at cotton fabrics. They do a great job of absorbing moistures, but they take an extremely long time to dry. You know, they love moisture, they absorb it well, and that's, you know, good in one respect, but in another respect, it's not so good. And that's because they're going to get wet, they're going to stay wet. And when you look at heat stress, one of the values or one of the ways that heat stress is mitigated is by sweating. But the key is the sweat has to evaporate off the skin, which pulls the heat away, which helps cool down the body. If you've got that wet moisture against the skin and it doesn't evaporate, it kind of mitigates the benefit of the sweating. So that hot, sweaty, soggy garment, cotton garment on there is really not going to help with the rehab condition. Plus, it's not very comfortable to wear as well. Also, you're looking at the appearance we talked about. You know, the cotton doesn't look that good for very long. It's going to have potential shrinkage issues. The FR shrinks much less. You're talking lasting 2 to 3 times longer than the cotton, which, if you do the math, actually is going to save money over time. And again, you get back into that appearance, public perception, department morale, those kind of things. You get a much better looking for a longer period of time when you get into your FR materials. When you take a look at what's being offered from Workrite, we've got our traditional classic Nomex line that's been around forever. Tom mentioned that his department is wearing it, and there's a lot of big departments wearing the Nomex, and they love the look, they love the longevity of it, stays well, it's easy care, those types of things. And we've also introduced a new line, our Station number 73 collection, which is made out of the TechaSafe station wear fabric, which is a monocrylic blend. It's FR, it's got some different characteristics to it than the Nomex, but it also has very good properties in terms of its ability to protect as well as to wick moisture and dry quickly. So let's take a look at some of the things that we hear people talk about with our classic line that they've been in for a long time. They talk about things like another layer of protection, which gets back to what Tom was talking about earlier. We've got people that talk about the cost, and they say, you know, the cost of the uniform is not much as compared to burn injury. So they're more, this particular chief's more concerned about minimizing burn injury than he is the cost of the difference in the cost of the uniforms. And they talk about the fact that it looks great. I mentioned that before, particularly the classic uniform, because it is autoclaved. It holds that pressed look and seams for the life of the garment. So that's the look is important to a number of the departments. Also look at things like the cost, where this chief talked about initially scared of the cost, but when they actually did the calculations, it really did save them money in the long run because of how long it lasts. It also talks about had a firefighter trapped, and they were pretty sure that extra layer of protection. And that gets back to Tom's exposure, where he was talking about flashover, where you get exposed to that and need some time to get out of the environment, and that extra layer of protection can be particularly important. And looking professional and holding up well. So those are just some quotes that we hear from people around. I'll share with you one thing that I heard at FDIC this year. A couple of departments that were wearing our uniforms came in and said they've been wearing them for 6-7 years and they're still looking good. So it's really a tribute to the materials and the way they're made, how long they last, and that really comes down to dollars and cents at one point. How much money, how little money it costs year in and year out when they last that long. So let's look at some of the comparisons between the classic and the Station 73 FR uniforms as they compare to polycotton and cotton. In terms of FR, obviously the two on the left are FR and the other two aren't, and the main point we keep stressing on the polycottons is the melting capabilities. Whether it meets 1975, everything except the polycottons do meet that because of their melting problems. And then wear life. We talk typically about 4 to 5 years, but as I said, there's departments that have them last even longer than that in the classic Nomex uniforms. The Station 73 fabrics are looking at estimates of 3 years plus. polycotton's a couple, and the cotton's a year and a half, and they're going to start to look, faded, worn. Shrinking could be a problem if they're not laundered properly. So you get what you pay for in essence. Cost over time, same thing. Low cost for the Nomex because of how long it lasts. Appearance, the classic Nomex uniform is just top of the line. That's where you get the autoclave. It's permanent press, if you will, so that you can wash them, hang them up to dry, or run through the dryer, hang them up, and they look just like they've been pressed. So that's an advantage there. And both the FRs have a very good appearance over time. Shrinkage, very little shrinkage in the FR lines. Polycotton's not too bad. The cotton obviously is going to shrink. That's going to be the one with the worst shrinkage issues. Moisture absorption, we talked about. The Nomex line has some wicking finishes on it, which do absorb some moisture, wick some moisture initially. Over time, that starts to diminish. But the monocrylic has it built into the fibers. It's got a wicking fiber as part of the blend, which allows it to wick moisture well. But then the drying, both the classic Nomex and the Station 73 dry fast, which is great for the rehab and comfort when you're get a lot of sweat in there. And the cottons and polycottons don't do nearly as well. And then color retention. Both the Nomex and the Station 73 have great color retention versus the other two, particularly the cottons. That's the one that's going to fade, and it's just not going to look good over time. So when you look at, I have an example here of our pant offering and how they differ between the two lines, just so you have a sense on what they are in terms of how they're constructed and what they look like. The Classic and the Station 73 both have a uniform look. The difference in the fabric, you've got your Nomex, which is autoclaved, and then you've got your monocrylic blend, which has both some aramid fibers as well as some wicking fibers in it for the moisture wicking. The waist in the Classic is a more classic straight waist, where the Station 73 is a contoured, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more contemporary looking waist. Regular fit for the Nomex, a more relaxed fit for the Station 73. Both legs have the silicone crease down the front to hold that nice crease. The Classic is a little more of a straight look of the leg, where the Station 73 is a little bit more relaxed. They're both 1975 compliant. Both have the standard Classic welt pockets in the back. And the Classic uniform has the very militaristic, classic-looking triple-stitched seams down the side of the pant, where the Station 73 goes with the double stitch, just mostly for looks, just makes it a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more contemporary look. So how do they compare to the polycotton? What do you gain? The most important one is the melting. No melt from the Classic uniform. It's more durable, it's going to cost less over time, great appearance, easy care, very low shrinkage and good color retention, both to washing and to light fastness. And then your Station 73, again, big point is the no melt versus the polycotton. And you've got the a little bit more comfortable feel to it because it's made with some different fibers in it, monocrylics and the moisture wicking fibers to add some comfort. Again, low shrinkage, good color fast and light fastness. So in essence, the most important thing is the safety aspect of it. All that part that Tom talked about, the non-melting, non-contributory factor, particularly for the cotton or the polycotton and the polys, that's the most important factor that we want to get across. We want to make sure people understand that there can be an impact. There can be a difference in what you wear. So keep that in mind when you're making your decisions. As we said, if you have questions, you can certainly submit them. I don't see that anything has come through at this point in time. But if you do have questions, feel free to shoot an email to either myself or Tom. We can help you out. And as Tom also mentioned, he's got a more in-depth presentation and information about the testing that was done. He's available to talk with departments, get into more details, and answer more questions. So if, again, I don't see any questions that have popped up at this time, so we appreciate everybody coming on board. This webinar will be archived on our website, workright.com, so if you want to go back through it or show it to some other people, that's certainly available. And let us know if you have questions in the future. So appreciate you coming on board and look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Have a great day.